Okay, so today, exactly. So today we're talking about Africa's turn, and what are the drivers of growth on the continent. And at CNN, we've charted this extraordinary transformation over the past few years, and it's real, it's tangible, and it's profound and dramatic in a way, a historical transformation that is economic but social at the same time. I mean, just look at the numbers. 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies have been in Africa. Out of all the African countries, 5 African countries will outgrow China. 21 have beaten India in terms of their expansion. Only 2 will expand less slowly than the US and Europe, and that's Swaziland and the Gambia. So how does that transform this continent? Is it Africa's century? And more importantly, if this is Africa's century, if this growth is so profound, what role do women have with this? How do women play a part in it? How do women maximize that growth? And is there any responsibility that women like these women and you out there have to the women whose lives are being absolutely fundamentally changed across the continent? So I think those are the things we're going to discuss today. It is a large panel, which tends to make things unwieldy, but in a way, like I said, that's a conversation. And I think we'd like to just start off, and I think the question is, I know that you were talking earlier about the drivers of change on the continent. We all know this is resource-driven in many ways. Also, the big story about consumers, about Africans who are suddenly becoming middle class. And middle class, we mean by having an extra $1 or $2. It's not necessarily $100 more. It's just a little bit more extra disposable income. And that is where, in many ways, has kick-started a lot of this and is more sustainable, perhaps, than the resource growth. So let's start with you and talk about how women, in a way, can jump on that bandwagon.
Well, thank you very much, Robin. I think for me, you talk about an African century. I'm an eternal African optimist, but that optimism is not misplaced. So I would say that there are objective drivers and subjective drivers, and the women, the objective ones are the ones that you mentioned. We have the best, I think, reserves of resources, and not only natural resources, but our people. The demographic, the youth, and all of that. So for me, the biggest one where women play a role is the subjective drivers of Africa's growth. And those are the way in which Africans have taken control of their own destiny. And I have seen in the most depressed areas, you go to the Eastern Congo, I said to you, we just returned from Liberia, you go to the deepest part of South Sudan. And it is amazing how the message that I think came out of the golden years, I call them, the 10 years where there was a huge drive towards African ownership of our own destiny, with the formation of the African Union, the launch of NEPAD, the formation of the African peer review mechanism, and all of that. That message has got down to the lowest village in Eastern Congo, has got down to the lowest village in Sudan.
But is it enough? Because when we were talking earlier, you said, I know about a women's company, Wiphold, that owns a mine. And I said, how many mines? 2. They just own 2.
Yes.
That's not enough. I mean, in a way, the question is, we use these examples of success, but it's just 1 mine, it's just 2 mines. What about whole banks? I mean, you need to think big, don't you? I mean, when we talk about an African century and women really participating, 1 mine is not enough, surely.
No, just one quick question on that. I'm talking about sustainability. And building countries and building economies is a long-term project. And people must stop looking at short-term solutions. So when I talk sustainability of that growth, I say I'm encouraged because the message of African Renaissance and African ownership has gotten down to the woman in the village. And therefore, when I look at the future, I'm hopeful that it will not be just 1 mine or 2 mines. That's very temporary. But I am absolutely certain that Africa is on a sustainable path and the women are going to benefit from that.
When we talk economy, we talk banks. you're involved in a big bank. How do you deal with a poor woman in Eastern Congo who really doesn't have any financial relevance to someone like you or to the bankers?
Thank you very much, Robin. I think for too long, banks have been bashed for not supporting female-owned businesses. But I think we need to look at why is it that, if you look at the statistics, the percentage of female-owned SMEs that are able to access financing from banks is very limited. I think that society as a whole, including the women on this panel, who have the networks, who have the financial resources and so on, should spend a lot of time on capacity building for female-owned and managed businesses, whether at the micro level, at the medium-scale levels, or small enterprises. I think one of the challenges is the fact that female-owned businesses are not as organized as typically male-owned businesses. Women start a business as a hobby and then it graduates into something commercial, but they don't put structures, they don't put governance around it. And so a lot of times they're inhibited from being able to access financing. A lot of work, though, has been done across Africa in terms of micro-enterprises where they are organized in groups and they're able to, sort of guarantee the funds and are able to access funding. But there's some limitations to how much you can grow a business at the micro level. Banks are also offering products that are focused on female-owned businesses. So they're blending both capacity building with access to financing. I mean, in Standard Chartered, we have accounts that are specifically for women, deposit accounts and lending accounts. And I know that, several other banks and financial institutions across Africa. But I wanted to touch on a point that was raised a minute ago, and it's that, you mentioned growth and the statistics for African growth. But I think we need to look at the issue of jobless growth, because a lot of it is actually jobless growth. Growth that is not creating enough jobs, whether it's, for women or for men, indeed, to be able to empower societies to grow economies. And the reason why it's important that we focus on these female SMEs as well is that, generally women are able to manage resources very well. A woman who is given, housekeeping money is able to stretch it much more than maybe your typical average man. And therefore, if we encourage female-owned businesses, they will be able to create jobs so that the growth in Africa as a whole will be meaningful growth. Growth that will empower people financially. Absolutely.
And I think it's the failure of governments often to convert growth into jobs. And I'm going to ask if that is in your responsibility in a way. You're dealing with economic development. On paper, South Africa, for example, should be steaming ahead, but it's not because of things like perhaps education. And these jobs can't be created if a grade 1 school teacher can't do the sums she's supposed to be teaching the 6-year-olds she's teaching. So how does South Africa acknowledge its failures and at the same time try and bridge this gap?
I'm disadvantaged because I have to use the old type of technology. I find this discussion fascinating. First of all, it's important to acknowledge that I think a big battle has been won because there are no laws today which cushion this different treatment between men and women. So which means as women, we are predisposed, we are in a better position. But if I may come to your question quickly, first, I think we have to have a strategy as to how do we get there. How do we make sure that we redress the imbalances of the past? By investing hugely in women's competences. For instance, in our case, we've been analyzing, doing the skills audit, looking at critical skills, looking at the job drivers and saying how many women are likely to benefit from there. And we have formed partnerships with the private sector in terms of saying, let's make a conscious and a deliberate effort to invest in young women, in girls, so that they begin to take strategic courses.
But when that's not happening, young girls in Lusikisiki, I've seen them, they still have to go down to the stream to get water. The primary schools are broken. The textbooks don't arrive. And in a way, this is not about bashing governments, but there needs to be sometimes a realization that it isn't working and things need to be hurried up. And is there a frustration when, in a way, that's not your department within government and you're reaping the effects of perhaps bad administration in a different department?
You know, in democracy, we've learned to be open-minded and to constantly be critical of ourselves, looking at the throughput, what is out there. You know, our universities used to be, academic institutions for its own sake. But we turn around the tide and we put huge amounts of money to say we need critical skills. We need people to be trained as artisans. And then we transfer some colleges into skills-specific centers. And of course, we haven't seen the output in terms of numbers as to how many artisans have we got. But the reason why we've come up with the National Development Plan is to say, let's continuously monitor and evaluate ourselves in terms of progress and say, by such and such a year, we should have so many skilled people in this sector. So jobs are not just jobs for its own sake, but it is the expectation and targets for jobs that will come out of specific industries.
Thank you. It's all very much about managing expectations, vision, the potential, and then the pragmatism and the difficulties and the challenges on the ground and sort of achieving these great lofty goals. And I want to talk to you about the theme of this year's World Economic Forum is, in a sense, managing Africa's potential, the promise. It's there. But in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, will our daughters be sitting up here and having the same conversation? We don't want them to be. You know, something needs to have been done, deepened, solidified, foundations literally dug. And how do you do that, particularly within the World Economic Forum, and why is that so important?
Well, Robin, that's a very good question. Going back to an earlier statement you made about being sort of optimistic, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I feel that very many Africans are. Optimistic because clearly progress has been made. We have, most of the fastest growing economies in the world. This is a successful outcome of good policies and policy reforms, which need to continue. But the reality also is that not much has changed on the ground. You know, we still have major infrastructure challenges, right? How can it be cheaper to source goods from outside the continent than from your neighbor, right? Somebody recently asked me and said, there's a sugar manufacturer in Nigeria, and he says, explain to me why it is cheaper to import sugar from Spain than from Nigeria into Sierra Leone, right? Then why manufacture sugar in Nigeria? So you're destroying opportunities right there. The other key area is in education, for example, where everyone's complaining about the major skills gaps across the continent. But we need to create about 10 million new jobs every year just to cope with the labor force that's going into the market. And one scary statistic is that by 2015, Africa will be the youngest continent in the world. What are these young people going to do? That's another reality. Yes, fastest growing, right, economies, clearly on the right track. But clearly, there are certain basics that we just need to address and get right. And the focus of our meeting this year really is bringing together sort of key leaders from different communities, so be it government or business or civil society, and to say, let's figure this out, right? We're on a good track. You can only invest when you're no longer having to think about whether you can eat or not, right? So there's some surplus. You can think forward. Infrastructure is a long-term investment. Education is an even longer-term investment, which requires us to be really sober because it affects and touches so many people's lives. So in that respect, I see women as being central players. Part of my concern, and just in my experience in public service, is so few women are running the economy or driving the economic drivers in our countries and in our governments. And unless we're able to figure out how to switch that balance, then we're not going to have inclusive growth. And that's critical. So for example, agriculture. Most farmers in agriculture are women, Yet we are still importing over $20 billion worth of food every year, and about 19 billion comes from outside of Africa. So if we're able to switch that balance, for example, what impact would that have on women? I think these are some practical questions that we need to deal with and address. Why are we running our own power generator systems because everyone has their own generator instead of fixing the major grid so that we're not spending so much money on just fueling our own personal energy systems? So we are hopeful that through our meeting, this is something concrete and concrete discussions that will take place and really just be more action-oriented. We really need to focus on execution right now.
There are a number of points I want to come back to later on that, but sure. I think this issue of Afro-optimism, I think it's become in a way quite trendy. And that whole Afro-pessimism is sort of a bit old hat. It's very 1990s, isn't it? But there is that question, and a very valid one. I mean, is Afro-optimism a little bit premature? Is it too exuberant? I mean, is there a myth here? Are we all perpetuating something that is or isn't as good as, some people want it to be? And I mean, Renaissance Capital is really betting on the African story as this African century. I mean, there's a risk involved, isn't there?
Absolutely. Thanks, Robin. There is a risk involved in Africa's optimism, but I will say we're highly optimistic about the growth of Africa, and I'll just I'll build on a few of the points you made to explain why. So apart from the fact that we have the largest population in the globe now, we're now over 1 billion collectively. If we look at the 3 highest potential sectors, whether it's oil and gas, there's more oil and gas being discovered in Africa. Power is the lowest consumption per capita globally. Retail and consumer sector is just beginning to grow, partly because of the population story, as well as some of the other dynamics like urbanization, middle income growth, etc. So if you look at those things and then you say, okay, part of this growth is actually an unprecedented growth that will happen off the back of a leapfrog phenomena because of technology and advancement in the world. So I use an example like the power sector. In the power sector, as everybody knows, power is a major issue in Nigeria. Now that there are starting to be very slow, painful power reforms, we're using 21st century technology and solutions to address those. What that means is a lot of the things we're doing today, nobody really knows exactly how to do them. And this is where the opportunity lies. So in some ways it's a bit slow and challenging and risky, but the opportunity lies there that women who are over 60% of the population in most cases and who should be playing a more fundamental role can come in and play in some of these sectors because everybody has to learn some of these things. And so therefore, you see around the power sector, the oil and gas sector, and agriculture, I'll just stay in those 3 sectors, you need more people, right from the woman who's selling more akara to the people who are doing the work, to the women. I went to a cement plant earlier this week, and I saw female engineers in a completely computer-controlled cement plant. And I'd been going to plants for the last 5 years. I'd never seen them. Now, how many did I saw 5, 6 of them. There are about 8 in the whole organization. So it's still tiny steps.
It's a bit like, is that enough? It's one mile.
It's not enough, but we're heading in the right direction. The potential is huge. The reality is you also don't have men who are doing some of these things as well. So what we have, I mean, in terms of, so the growth is there, it's real. It will be challenging. Women have a very clear role and opportunity to play in it. The solutions really lie in us, firstly, having many more women in senior positions. I think much more in the private sector, because now we're seeing the growth starting to unlock a bit more, because the private sector is getting more involved in most of the economies and driving these things forward. So we need to see more female CEOs, more female senior women, which means more training, education, and mentoring and supporting of these women. We need to see more females in government. We need to lobby for them. We need to support them. We need to see them there. And we also need to see much more vocational training, targeted particularly at women. And if we come through at all those different angles, the change will come faster. The opportunities are there. It's just for us to tap into them more and continue to leverage that growth. Just one more thing. The All World and Elumelu Foundation did the 50 fastest growing companies in Nigeria. for the first time they ever saw, 6 of them were growing at over 1,000%. 13 of those 50 were companies run by women. So, yes, it isn't enough, but every day I see it growing step by step.
Okay, so I think in a way, the big question then is, how do you take this forward? How do you have 100 minds or 50 of the 50 fastest growing companies being run by women? What are particularly within the private sector, what are the things that can change? And as a woman in a senior position within the private sector, what is stopping more women becoming a mid-level manager, not necessarily just the CEO? And what can be done about it? What is somebody going to walk out of here saying, listen, I think I can go back to my HR person and say, that's a good piece of advice?
Okay, well, I can tell you, I can give 1 or 2 examples of what we're doing in Nigeria. Because indeed we found that the workforce sort of gender pyramid is getting steeper, where more and more 50-50 male-female intake, at entry level in a lot of corporates. But going up the ladder, you find a lot of women come out of the workforce. And as I said earlier, a lot of female entrepreneurs are also finding it very difficult to raise funding. A couple of examples. In the banking system, we have a bankers committee made up of CEOs of banks, and last year a women's economic empowerment subcommittee was established, which I chair, and our mandate was increase the number of women in senior positions in banks and provide the enabling environment for more female-owned and managed businesses to be able to access funding. So what have we done in terms of corporates in the banking sector? We've got a commitment from all 20 Nigerian banks for by 2015 to have at least 30% female representation on boards and 40% female representation at senior management. Now, why is that important? Society, certainly in my country, is almost 50-50 male-female. So, companies and corporates mirroring that would sort of mirror society. 1, 2, there has to be some form of not so much affirmative action, but positive steps through moral suasion for there to be more women in senior positions and therefore to be in a position to influence workplace policies that may inadvertently discriminate against women.
The reason I'm pushing you on this was you had a wonderful example of working for a bank. I think this was in New York, wasn't it?
No, in Lagos.
It was in Lagos. And just about healthcare and medical aid. And the hypocrisy in many ways that comes with a medical aid system within a corporate environment that doesn't facilitate female management.
Absolutely.
Explain that to me.
Okay, well, the illustration I gave Robin earlier was a financial institution that I worked for provides free medical care to its staff, with the proviso, though, that for the female staff, they would not be able to cover antenatal care and other female-related care like fibroids and so on. At that point, I was the only female on the board of the bank, so I brought it up. I mean, this is a bank that's over a century old, but these policies were not sort of intentionally put in place to discriminate against women. They just evolved over the years. And some of the conversations centered around, well, pregnancy is self-induced, and why should organizations cover medical care? And my point was, well, I could get fibroids, but I wouldn't be able to get prostate, yet the medical cover provided for treatment for prostate. So it's just an example of the need for there to be senior women in organizations to be able to sort of bring up issues like this that discriminate against younger women. A young woman in such a case would leave the workforce because she's got to go, sort herself out in terms of pregnancy. But going back to the Women's Economic Empowerment Committee, the second thing that we've been able to do is to get, there's a fund that's been set up. It's a small, medium, and micro enterprises fund that's been put together by the central bank. It's an $800 million fund. We've gotten a commitment for 60% of that fund to go to female-owned and managed businesses. But again, the challenge is, would they really be able to access the funding without being organized? So part of what we're doing is putting in place a capacity-building plan to ensure that the women indeed qualify and are able to access the funding at subsidized interest rates. The third thing, though, also is that we talk about women in the corporate workplace maybe not necessarily, getting to the top and so on. Why is this? Some of it is influenced by society, some of it is influenced by culture, some of it is influenced by, in fact, what I call choice of spouse. So part of what we're doing and working on also is to create a lot more awareness in terms of the needs and challenges that women face, female entrepreneurs and women in corporate workplaces, so that we can also get, because it's not, in Africa, society, family, and culture matter. A lot of decisions are not taken by the individual alone. Even female-owned and managed businesses, sometimes there are constraints that are inbuilt because of family. So your in-laws say your business is becoming too successful, you need to slow down. Or you're rising too fast up the corporate ladder, you need to slow down. So it's basically creating an awareness of the issues and then finding ways to deal with them.
You mentioned partnerships, and I think this issue of the private sector steaming ahead and bringing government with, and government enabling private sector to do what it does best, which is make money and grow things. There's a lot of responsibility on female leaders, particularly in the business world, who've done well. We're asking you, what have you done to help other women? Men don't do that. They don't say, how many boys have you mentored today, kind of thing. So there is an added responsibility in a way. And you look at somebody like Joyce Banda in Malawi, huge responsibility from a symbolic point of view for this female president of a country to suddenly do something for the women of Malawi. And I was there a few months ago, and it was extraordinary how the women of Malawi are still very much stuck at home. There's absolutely no access to abortion. Something like 70,000 illegal abortions a year happen in Malawi. And when you go to Malawi, there are lots of children, I think about 1 million orphans out of a country of about 10 million people. Now, this is about Malawi. This is a business discussion, but it's all related to social health, to the role of women at home. And you look at that and you say, well, Malawi's got a female president, you go girl kind of thing. But when it boils down to it, Malawi's women are just as disenfranchised as if they would have a male president. Now, that is not Joyce Banda's fault. And is it her responsibility to now focus on women's issues because she's the woman president? And I think that's a question we ask again from government. What is a priority, and why is it so important that perhaps Joyce Banda needs to take more cognizance of the women in her country? Or is it actually just so much to do in your inbox, you can't do it all, like any old man or any old woman?
To pick up on the issue of women not succeeding because they are not so organized. You see, men have access because of networks and partnerships. Half the time they'll be fighting, but they would have gotten opportunity. So there are other issues that we have to look at as to why women are not having access. It's because they are not part of a boys' club network in terms of knowing what opportunities are.
But whose fault is that? That's our fault, surely. I mean,
So let me come to the second point. It's a question of a strategy for me. Even at first I wanted to raise that. So looking at where we are, the context within which we try to enter the economic system, we have to have clear strategies as to how we partner and connect. Sometimes for women who have made it, you'll find that in any one sector, in mining, for instance, you will know maybe not less than 5 women who are in mining. And we're talking about billions. It's a cost driver in the country like South Africa. The question is why? You see, so it means those women have made an entry, but they don't have a strategy as to how do we become a transformation hub and aggressively bring in other women. Not necessarily, we always see as though when they enter, they will be in competition with us. We're not conscious of a value chain that we can bring them in and they will cash in other aspects of mining. It could be polishing, it could be jewelry, it could be logistics, it could be a stockpile, or, you name it. So those are some of the issues that we have to use platform like these to really take a critical look at what is holding us back. As women, I think we have to continue to take responsibility for some of the social ills we're talking about, so as to ensure that we create a different society. And we cannot afford, we don't have a choice, we cannot leave a legacy which will be inherited by future generations where they will have to struggle with the kind of issues we're struggling with.
Does anybody, so just to interrupt, does anybody else want to talk about this issue, the sort of responsibility that women in power have to other women? Is it disingenuous in a way? I mean, why the need, if at all?
I think it's necessary. You said earlier that men don't have to do it. True, they don't have to do it, but there are a lot of things, there's a lot of responsibility that women have that men don't have. The future of Africa's growth is in the hands of women to a large extent. We have to step up. So to my mind, we need to take responsibility. We need to ask for a seat at the table. We need to drive some of these initiatives. We have a number of great initiatives. There's a WIMBIZ in Nigeria where there's a whole organization of senior women in industry who drive through all levels. They support people going into politics. They support young women and their careers and how they manage them. It's a very important topic. They also support how people building their businesses, capacity building, etc. And in our own little ways, I mean, what Bola said, I completely identify with in terms of healthcare. I've sat on committees before. The argument is actually very simple and rational. The costs of the things that we have, insurance companies charge more for. Rather, the things we need, like antenatal care, some of the cesarean,
yeah.
they do just cost more. So it's not about men saying we don't like women and let's exclude them.
Yeah.
It's about them just thinking, let's just
down
make this
there in paper.
Exactly. And that's why I have to agree with Bola. You need more women at the table to say, no, hang on a minute. This has to be done, and we must have it. One of the simple things I did when I joined my current organization was to look at the healthcare structure. Because I knew, as Bola said, because it's a very common practice, and we changed it. We changed it so that it did include those things. So there's some very simple steps we can all take. Mentoring and supporting women is another big thing that we all must do. So if we wait for men to... This isn't about men or women anymore.
No, and I think that's the key. It's not about bashing men.
It's about women chipping in and moving forward and accepting that we won't be invited to have a seat at the table always, and saying, okay, where are the important areas where we can genuinely contribute, and where is our contribution important, and how do we start to some of us that see it more, or some other people, to start to bring other women forward and to organize some of these things. It's harder work, it's more onerous because we have a lot of other things we're managing, and the inboxes are full. Yeah. But if we don't do it, it's just not going to happen.
I just want to bring in this issue we were chatting before. I was reading the Financial Times over the weekend, and there was a book review of a number of books on women or by women, and one of them was by Alison Wolfe called The XX Factor, How Working Women Are Creating a New Society. And essentially that's all of us. And how, in a way, there's 70 million, not necessarily rich, but, earning, working women in the world who are becoming a global elite and have more in common, perhaps, with their male counterparts than they do with a uneducated woman from their same country. So this is not about a gender gap. This is more about an education. It's about inequality. And in a way, how do people like you and me and all of us who are working, who are educated, is it our responsibility to mentor this growing global new society of working women, or do you have to go right down to the bottom of the pyramid? I mean, I'm just trying to get sort of practical assessments of where, if there is a responsibility for us, is it to grow the top of the pyramid, or is it to play a part in helping some gogo in KwaZulu-Natal who needs an extra 500 rand to restock her spaza shop? I mean, that's one example. Give me some sense of how the World Economic Forum plays this.
Well, first of all, the World Economic Forum is really a community of communities. Yeah. So I'll just share more sort of like examples of best practice from what we're seeing and what we tend to promote. One thing I wanted to highlight, just based on the previous question that you had about responsibility and why it's important to bring more women to the table, is simply because that we as women are different, and we as women have different needs and are under different obligations. And one example that I had recently was of a head of a business school which is traditionally sort of male-dominated, so even administratively had a lot more men in the management structure. And she had an HR director who was a woman, and she came to her one day with issues about, sort of maternal health and the policies that they had. But the head of the business school had never had children at that point. So she was completely blind, despite the fact that she considers herself a womanist. So this is one aspect that I think we need to keep in mind as to why you want to have more of you around the table, so that everyone can at least be faithful to their own values and personal commitments. Speaking more generally, back to your question, I think we need to approach it at a macro and a micro level, and to approach it also as an ecosystem. And this is simply because we live in societies, and the society is both macro and micro. The key opportunity that I see now personally is that the sectors that are driving growth are more friendly to women. Mining, oil, and gas only account for about a third of the current growth that we're seeing. Mining, oil, and gas as industries and working environments are hostile towards women. It's very difficult as an industry to go down into pit mines, etc. So that's not necessarily the best place to want to sort of drive and create opportunities for women. And I'm not saying that women shouldn't be involved. I'm just saying it's not friendly to the majority. What's happening now with consumer industries growing, you're saying, and these are industries in which women are actively engaged, so whether it's retail, even in construction, you have quite a few women involved. Telecommunications has created even more opportunities for women. I don't see why these industries can't grow, and I would be very surprised if we don't start to see many more women in leadership positions, in CEO positions. They understand the consumer market. Women are the largest consumers. And women understand women better. So I think if we take a more holistic viewpoint and have women also more in the driver's seat as opposed to, the passenger seat, then we can revisit also the environment within which we operate, so policies, institutions, and infrastructure, to ensure that they work for women, and rather for the businesses, for the economic activities, rather than whether it's just women or men who are driving them.
And I know you're on the front line and trying to actually literally thrash out some of these policies. Give me some sense, particularly when it comes to infrastructure, because that in a way is also the driver of Africa's growth, potentially, and at times fails, and at other times, as soon as there's a new port, you're talking about incredible opportunities. So give me some sense how women and females can play a role in something like a new port in West Africa, or, creating a new railway line in Kenya, linking East Africa, is one thing. How does that empower businesswomen?
Well, first of all, I don't want to take a shot at Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum. But, he's been running the World Economic Forum for a number of years, as we all know. And when he created a role for his wife, it was a social entrepreneur prize. I was asking him, I said, why doesn't she present the best economic model prize? Why the social one? And that's my critique of your boss, the founder of the World Economic. He had to put his wife in the social arena, and I just, as a person, he knows that anyway.
Yes.
Let me just say that to change doesn't happen without you fighting for it. I mean, we know that very, very strongly. So I think that as African women in the first instance, but as women in the world, we have won some big battle in terms of mindset. Now, patriarchy happened over many, many years. And I'm not saying it's going to take the same time to remove it, but I think we're on the way there. And there's only one way in which we are going to change, and it's hard work. People want things to come to them without putting in the hours. Yeah. You really have to put in the hours. You have to read. You have to understand what you are doing and do the right thing. That's the only way that we are going to go forward. Now, Bola, I think, and Yvonne have mentioned some of the programs that they run. It's almost the same globally, in terms of inclusion of women. Yeah. Yeah, as you know, in South Africa, you actually have what the Americans call set-asides. But you will have challenges, Robin. You would have setbacks. You know, we have mines that are run by women here and operated by women and plants and all of that. Not enough. And as I say, you would have setbacks. You will have people who do wrong things. You will have some corruption. But, you know, who doesn't have setbacks? I mean, the U.S. has been trying to build an economy for the last 300 years. They still haven't got it right. Look at the mess that they are in. Look at the mess that Europe is in. And we shouldn't sit here and judge them. They really are trying, and I think in our own way, we are trying, and I think women, I honestly believe that the biggest wars have been won, but the challenges remain, and I really think it's just for us to, let's go and work.
On that note, I'm going to make you guys work now. Let's take some questions. Not a lot. I think we've got about 10 minutes. So, you know what? I'm going to go with a man first. There you go.
Do you have the mic? Where's the mic?
We can borrow him that
It's
one.
this.
There we go.
Let's borrow him that one. It's faster.
Oh, we're going to need the mic, yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Luther King Faseo. I'm the technical and policy lead with the Wellbeing Foundation. I was just thinking, given the rates of out-of-pocket healthcare spending in Africa and the rates of catastrophic healthcare spending in Africa, if it was possible for, I know it's possible, for business groups of women to come together and form pockets of community healthcare insurance schemes. That's very possible. We know it works. But how can successful African women, entrepreneurs in the public sector, private sector, drive these processes? How can they make this happen? How can they incentivize these things to happen? And how can the World Economic Forum engender this process? You want me to answer that?
If you do.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Basically, my question initially was to find out how women could drive and fund and innovative financing mechanisms and all that. But I think from the man's perspective, I think women have to take the front burner seat. It's not a natural thing for men to allow women lead. From a man's perspective, they have to earn it. They have to ask for it. They have to demand for it.
They have to fight.
When women get to that level when they can influence decisions like startup financing mechanism for small pockets of community healthcare insurance, when they get to that level, then they can make those things happen. But before they get to that level, they have to work their way up. Most times in Africa, unfortunately. Yeah.
Does anybody want to add to that? And I think, there is this thing that, like I mentioned, which I find fascinating. This is less about a gender issue and more about everybody trying to figure out the best way to grow Africa or grow your businesses or to invest in the right vehicles, that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I would say that creating an environment that where women feel empowered is important. You said just now that you have to ask for it. That to me is empowering somebody else to take the decision as to whether to give it to you or not. I think that we've spoken about so many issues here, education, funding, seeing role models as well, just looking up and being aspirational, I think puts women in a very strong position to claim it. Rather than ask for it. I found that in some of my sort of NGO activities, there have been several women who've been nursing sort of their entrepreneurial, what they believe entrepreneurial talent is. But to make that break from doing a 9-to-5 job into setting up a business, oftentimes has been triggered when they hear other women who've been successful, and then they take that step, plan, and then set up their businesses. Now, a woman who is, working and doing a 9-to-5, if she doesn't see banks that create capacity building where she can go in the evenings to learn how to run a business, if she doesn't see other successful women who've been able to do it, then she's not going to want to achieve it. But if she's sitting there waiting for somebody to give it to her, it won't happen. So I think that, for the women out here, we need to actually be aspirational. We need to also, as Felicia had said earlier, we need to find mentors. The osmosis will make sure that, those positive things will also rub into us. But I just want to make one quick point as well, and I think Yvonne alluded to it. There's an organization I co-founded about 11 years ago called Women in Management and Business, and we've now extended it to public service because there's a limitation on what you can do in management and business if the political environment as well is not stable and conducive. And a lot of what we've done is exactly what I've described now. It's about experiential exposure to women as to what they can aspire to be. And I will crave your indulgence, Robin, by saying I have some of my colleagues here from WIMBIZ. Can you stand up for 2 seconds? And the work that we've all been doing, basically to just go out there and try and leave a legacy. Because I think a lot of what we're talking about is what do I want to be remembered by? Will my children look up and say, you just was on that conveyor belt, you got on at one end, you got off at the other end, and you didn't make any impact at all. I want to make sure that when I get off that conveyor belt, that I will be remembered. And I think it's about legacy, mentoring, and pulling up younger women as well.
I think that's great. Oh, there's a mic over there. Do you want to go? I don't know. We've got a mic issue.
My name is Rachel. I'm in the construction industry.
Yeah.
A very difficult one. My message to the lady, adding to the gentleman behind me. If you want something, you go get it. As a woman, whether there's a man that is in power, you tell him what you want. So all the women, they must be passionate of what they're doing. They must do the right things. They must have their governance in place so that even their resources must be in place. We were incubated by our government. In the process, the incubator program never went through. But as a woman, because I had ambition, I told myself I started this, I must run the race. And it was easy for me to pull through. Today, I can stand here and testify and say, if you know what you want, you can go through it. It's not about us get fitted all the time. It's what we do as well. So they can do this little, but we must do more so that we are successful.
Thank you.
Let's go on.
Okay, and another. Sorry, there's a lady over there who just in there. No, there she is over there. There we go.
With 5 more minutes left.
Sorry, Robin. There's only one mic, but then she wanted to speak.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to? Okay.
Do you want to speak?
Hold on. I'm just getting a bit confused with the mic issue.
When you summarize,
sorry,
put all of this into consideration. You'll have at least 30 seconds to summarize.
But you need at least.
Go ahead, Doc.
I would like to ask a question and say, we always see men being rated. So and so. How many women in Africa have made it who are millionaires? And if they are, why can they not be our success story so that others may inspire? Because inspiring is the word there, and entrepreneurship. The most pioneers in Africa fought for equality and leadership, and they didn't take their space. But now it's the time. And if it is, what do you have in place as African women to make sure that we succeed? Because if we do have the millionaires, it's good to know, because I believe there are many young men who are millionaires, and where are the young girls? Thank you.
Thank you. I know Professor Mkhize needs to make a comment. Let me, there we are.
Can you hold your question maybe for the next panel? It's still roughly around the same thing. My only worry I have is it's time and we have to go and have lunch.
You do need to say something, I can see. So please just quickly say it. I feel that's okay.
Okay. No, I just wanted to signal a warning here. If we were sitting here, we see, there were families here. People were pushed away. Women need to be given opportunity in an aggressive way. Because without that conscious effort, women in rural communities, for instance, we cannot even talk access for them because they don't have even adequate information and skills as to how they get there. So I think women who have made it has a responsibility to use policies to aggressively fast-track other women. On their own, they are not going to make it. Because our systems are such that, if you don't have network, you will find it very difficult to access opportunities and to grow them. Of course, once you are in, again, we have to come up with policies that will make women to be suppliers of choice. If we do not work on that and we hope things are equal, women can make it on their own, we'll find ourselves revolving around the circle for the next century.
Thank you. This hour went remarkably quickly, actually.
It did.
Thank you very much. And I think this is that back to my original point. Is this Africa's century? But it's also more about, is this African women's century, and how does it become that? And I think the trick is that, like it or not, in addition to doing the lunch boxes and the school lifts and running companies, there's also a responsibility that might or might not be justified, but it's there. And I think, there's a word called piggybacking, and I think, in a way, that might define the growth on this continent, particularly when it comes to the impact of women. So thanks all very much, and thank you very much to our panelists as well.